Whatever happens, come rain or shine, I will trust God. That's Job's faith. He loses all his children and says, the Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. And next, he is physically afflicted and says, though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. You see, his faith carried him through to the other side of his suffering. What kind of faith do we have? Is it an all-weather faith? In one sense, we are like Job. We ask, why is this happening to me? When I was a church pastor, I officiated at some terrible funerals. Perhaps the worst were the deaths of babies and children. And what I discovered was that it wasn't my words that helped. Often I was told, you've really helped me. And frankly, I hadn't really said anything. I just turned up and was there for the sufferer. Having said that, there are reasons why we go through suffering, and just as long as we don't use these reasons like a club to hit a sufferer over the head with, as Job's friends did, they are worth knowing because they are biblical reasons as to why we hurt. So let's note them. It may be to discipline us for disobedience. Now watch out with this. I'm saying it first to get it out of the way. Because not all pain is earned, but some is. When a football player is injured and carried off the field, you realise by putting himself into the game, he puts himself into a position where he may sustain an injury. And we live in a universe, not an indieverse. We are involved with other people in a fallen world. So inevitably there are knock-on effects. We can love but also hate. We can help but also hurt. It's the nature of the world we are in. Having said that, we can bring trouble on ourselves, can't we? Refuse to study and we won't get a degree. Overspend and we will end up in debt. Drink and drive and there are consequences. A schoolboy wasn't getting good grades. He said to his teacher, I don't want to scare you, but my dad says if I don't get better grades, somebody is going to be in trouble. That boy doesn't get it. Sooner or later, however, every child of God goes through some chastisement. Now, realise it's not punishment. That's what the court judge does and then walks away from the case. But when a parent disciplines, they continue to feel it. Have I done the right thing? Have I done it in the right way? Will it improve my child? And God is serious about our spiritual health. And there are times when he will step in to correct us where necessary. But please, please, don't make hasty assumptions about our hurts. This is what Job's friends did, and they were dead wrong. And remember, there's only one type of person God disciplines, and that's the child he loves. That said, disobedience has consequences. Let me give you a second reason why we hurt. It prepares our hearts for heaven. That's why believers often look forward to death. What we are going through makes us long for a better place. It gets us ready for eternity. A physician said of a godly man to whom he broke the news that he may not live more than a couple of days. The thought of death kept him alive for a further fortnight. And let me tell you another reason why we hurt. It helps us discover what we can't do. You see, Paul despaired of life. He felt knocked down and almost knocked out. But he adds, this happened that we might not rely on ourselves. A reason why God sends suffering is because of our self-sufficiency. Read Paul's story. I mean, he is a brilliant, self-reliant young man, highly educated. And God needed to break that so that he could do through him what he wanted, not what Paul thought he could achieve. A tragedy of our modern world is that we can live trivial lives and get away with it. And an advantage of a trial is that it forces us to focus on what we can do, because there are lots of things we can't do. Both a light bulb and a laser release light energy. The difference is the focus. It makes the laser far stronger and powerful. Trying to do too many things can thin life out. And the advantage of a disadvantage is that it will limit and focus us down. And that can be a good thing. Do you see that? And a fourth reason for our hurts is we discover what we can do for other people. Paul says to the Corinthians, God comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves have received from our God, from God himself. Our sufferings are not just for us. They help us help other people in their troubles. Suffering has a way of binding us to people. Prosperity has a way of breaking that tie. And let me just tell you one more reason why we hurt. It tests faith validity. Listen to the Apostle Peter. For a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may be proved genuine. Don't we want to be proved genuine? Well, it's through the trying, the testing of our faith. The dross is removed from our lives. Well, this was Job's situation. So let me wrap up today's message. How did Job find strength for his troubles? And how do we find strength for our struggles now, or when inevitably they will come in the future? To find strength, count on God's protection. A statement Satan made in chapter 1 verse 10 makes that clear. Satan observed God had built a hedge of protection around Job. God does provide a hedge of protection for those who honour him. Did you notice God's evaluation of Job? Have you considered my servant Job? God doesn't build a hedge around all people, only his servants. When hearing the word hedge, do we think of plants which are easy to break through? The Hebrew means hard packed stones with thorns on top. That's hard to break through. Satan pointed out that God had built a spiritual hedge around Job. And God can provide a spiritual barrier around us. Don't think that Satan can touch us unless God permits it. And if God permits it, it will be for his purposes. And you know, Job was the kind of father who prayed for a hedge of protection around his children. And we can pray for a hedge of protection around those we love. Finding strength starts by counting on God's protection, knowing that you have it. We do have it. Nothing will break through into our life which is out of his control. Affirm that fact. But we must also consider our perspective. Satan suggested God strike Job, but God never did. He left it to Satan to test him. Sometimes people who suffer get angry at God. Look, if we want to express our anger and hatred directed at Satan, that's the right perspective. Paul Bilheimer has a great word about this. Don't waste your sorrow. We can do so. Satan is the agent of destruction, not God. Who was it that destroyed Job's fortune? Who destroyed his family? Who destroyed his health? When God permitted it done, Satan. God is blamed for the work of the devil by millions of people, even by some Christians who should know better. You see, the permission of God is never the same as the evil work of Satan after permission is granted. Withdrawing protection is not the same as the destruction itself. God's work is that of deliverance. Satan's is that of destruction. And it's okay to get mad at the devil, but we don't have to be afraid. There's a funny story told of how the devil decided to visit a church during a Sunday service. When the congregation saw him, they ran away. But one elderly man stayed. The devil said, "Boo!" And the man didn't flinch. He said, "You don't scare me. I've been married to your sister these past 50 years. So let's get the main point. Revelation 12:11. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. You've heard about weapons of mass destruction. Here are the weapons to bring down principalities and powers. First, Calvary. Affirm the blood of Christ to cleanse away all sin. Believe it. Second, confession. Your word of testimony. What we say is so important. Declare our trust. You know, sin leaves our body through our mouth. It's as we confess Christ as Lord, having believed in our heart, our salvation is real. So, Calvary, confession, and thirdly, commitment. Not loving our lives so much we can't lose them for him. Some people think of Job as a man who lost it all. But I tell you this, he never lost anything because he had already given it up to God. And the secret to victory is a life abandoned to God. Most of our worries stem from the fact that we love our lives so much we can't let them go. But you can't scare a dead man. And when we've died to ourselves and are alive to Christ, that's the answer. Do you see that? So, what do we learn from the hedge in Job's life? We learn Satan is always trying to breach God's hedge of protection. And unless God had allowed Satan to test us, he never can touch us. And when our faith is firm and we pass the test, there will be a better hedge around us than ever before. In the northeastern United States, codfish are a big commercial business. The public demand for eastern cod posed a problem to the shippers. At first they froze the cod, then shipped them elsewhere. But the freezing took away much of the flavour. So they experimented with shipping them alive in tanks of seawater, but that proved even worse. Not only was it more expensive, but the codfish also still lost flavour and became soft and mushy. So finally, some creative person solved the problem. The codfish were placed in the tank of water along with their natural enemy, the catfish. From the time the cod left the east coast until it arrived at its westernmost destination, those catfish chased the cod all around the tank. And when the cod arrived at the market, they were as fresh as when they were first caught, with no loss of flavour, nor was the texture affected. Each one of us is in a tank of particular and inescapable circumstances. Well, it's painful enough to stay in the tank, but then there are those God-allowed catfish. Maybe we are living with one of them, or perhaps it's someone at work whose irritating presence drives you to your knees several times a week. Every church has a few catfish as well. They are there to keep all the cod from getting soft, mushy and tasteless. And we can be strengthened through the trial just as long as we ask God for wisdom to handle it well. God always brings us what we need and what he knows is best. So trust him. Will you do that? Trust him in all circumstances.